Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Welcome to the DMZ, everybody.
Beautiful summer day here in northern DMZ. Is it feeling swampy where you are?
We've had nice weather here in southern DMZ. It's nice out. I mean, it's literally a swamp, and it usually gets pretty hot and humid. But I have to say, I'm loving it.
Because usually people in D.C. complain about summer. This is the worst season. Everyone gets out. It's a swamp. It's buggy. It's sweaty.
Ever since the invention of air conditioning and swimming pools, I like summer better than anything. So I will not complain about the summer.
All right. I would imagine this week has been a really disorienting week for a Washington member of the conservative movement in good standing. Am I wrong about that?
We would have to ask Juan. I don't know that I'm in good standing, but...
I mean, you are a sort of quasi... I mean, never Trumper is probably too harsh to say for you, because you're more of you're a la carte. Let me put it this way. It was not that long ago, Matt, where you said Trump was Reaganing.
Like a week ago?
He was Reaganing.
Was it a week ago?
Because he had the Supreme Court in his hands. He downgraded, I guess to hardening after going to Kavanaugh and not to Barrett.
Now he's Putining.
Right.
Putining.
Because you were someone, and you've been on air about this. I don't know if horrified's the right word, at least sad.
Very sad. Yeah.
That Trump is not behaving in a Reagan-esque way in his dealings with Russia.
It's really unfathomable. It's the words escape me. But to stand on stage, beside former KGB agent, and basically say both sides have made mistakes, and to take his side over, Trump's own intelligence team that he brought on, and in many cases, is just disheartening and demoralizing and disappointing.
So for as long as we've been alive, Reagan has been the touchstone for the conservative movement, the guiding light. When foreign powers looked into Reagan's steely glare, they crumbled before him.
Yeah, there they go again. I'm back and I'm pissed off.
Now, it was already argued that Trump was making this Trump's party and not Reagan's party upon his election, or his nomination election. He never was running on a Reagan-esque style foreign policy. But there are still people, Reagan's still pretty beloved. And is there anybody that you know that was more partial to Trump than you as of a week ago and is now questioning their loyalties because of this episode?
My mom.
Really?
Yeah. I talked to my mom yesterday, and she is, off the Trump bandwagon. She told me that she would have voted for Biden if he had been an option.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's enormous.
So we'll see.
Let's refresh people here. I've never met your mom. I don't want to sound like I'm being rude to your elders. But just recount what you have told me. She was a fan of the Dinesh D'Souza documentary during the 20s. She was a
fan of it. I think it radicalized her.
She believed it, right?
Adjacent to her. I mean, I think one of the things people don't fully grasp, and even I don't quite understand it, is that the hatred and dislike of Hillary Clinton.
Right.
So, and that factor, I think, is not fully appreciated by a lot of us.
And so she was already primed to dislike Hillary. A lot of the conspiratorial elements of the D'Souza documentary about Hillary, she embraced.
I can't say for sure. I didn't see the movie.
Okay.
All I know is after one of her sisters took her to see the movie. She was like locked and loaded. Maybe that's not a good term. It's like she was literally drove people to the polls to vote for Trump.
Okay, and you don't know if she was all the way there before the movie?
I mean, she was. You know, she always disliked the Clintons, and like Bill Clinton especially. And actually, what she told me yesterday, Bill, was that she's told me many times that she can't like stand to look at Bill Clinton. That like just looking at him gives her the heebie-jeebies or something. And she told me that like Trump is giving her that feeling that she had about Bill Clinton. And I'll tell you the thing that really bothered her. It's interesting. It was that nobody was in there with him talking to Putin. Like, that's the thing that she kept going back to, that, like, there wasn't any advisors in there and nobody taking notes or keeping track of it. Like, that was the thing for her that really made it, like, really bothered her. And I haven't heard much about that in the commentary. The commentary has been other stuff mostly.
Now, did she vote Trump in the primary, or do you not know?
No. She would not have. She would have voted for, I think, Rubio probably.
Okay.
I'd have to verify, but no, she definitely. Trump was like, she's like a lot of conservatives and Republicans, where Trump was probably their 16th pick, but then I think they got caught up in the excitement of the election and also the binary choice between Trump and Hillary.
So that's notable because here's somebody who you might consider to be somewhat of a soft Trump voter.
Yeah.
Defined broadly. She wasn't holding her nose on Election Day, but she wasn't there from the beginning. She wasn't somebody, and this is from my discussions with Selena Zito and Brad Todd, who wrote The Great Revolt, and I had them on my New Books in Politics podcast. There's a class of voter they identified who were kind of Trump only. They weren't regular voters otherwise, but they were pulled in by Trump. She's not that. She's sort of a tried and true Republican voter who really wasn't there from the get-go, really hated the Clintons, got on board, and this is the moment. We all keep asking, what's it going to take? For her, this was the breaking point. This was
a real turning point for her. Now, her sisters are more, a lot of my aunts are more hardcore Trump. And they're just, whatever Trump does, they will say is, the media is telling you a lie.
So you have no evidence that they've been broken because of this?
No, not at all. But with my mom, I think here's the problem, though, is now first of all, the obvious point that this is obviously anecdotal, but it's real. And
she's swing state too, right?
Pennsylvania.
Right.
Yeah. Now, I have no idea what this does in terms of the midterms, but I would say the problem is in the general, even if nothing changed and she was able to sort of hold on to this, where she is today, up until the 2020 elections, she still might vote, even based on where she's at today, she still might vote for Trump if the Democratic Party nominates somebody that's,
more far left.
Right. And I think they probably will.
But if it was Biden-Trump...
That's what she said.
She would vote Biden.
That's what she said. But then I told her, I think, and then she added something like, if he doesn't go too crazy on like the abortion stuff or something. And I told her, well, in order for Biden to win the Democratic nomination, he's going to have to do things that would disqualify you from voting for him. And so it's like a catch-22.
I think Biden was somebody. I don't get too off on Biden right now. We have more important things to talk about. Where Biden was somebody who wanted Obama to go easy on the contraception mandate, in deference to Catholics, and not have people like Hobby Lobby be forced to directly comply with it. So you admit it, he has that antenna.
Yeah.
He's from Pennsylvania. He knows that there is that religious Catholic voter that might agree with Democrats on other issues, and he doesn't want to push too hard to alienate that voter. At the same time, this is the guy who wrote the Domestic Violence Against Women Act. I mean, he knows the women's rights community very well too, and he knows. And this is someone who has been very deft at toggling between different communities over the course of his career. So, he wants to win your mom's vote at the end of the day, yeah. But he also wants to get through a Democratic primary, assuming that he's running. So,
such a conundrum.
Yeah. So anyway, back to Trump and Russia. So, in addition to Trump's abhorrent performance on the stage with Putin, you have the double whammy of the Maria Butina case,
right?
The accused Russian spy who had infiltrated the gun rights movement. To what extent is this more or less unsettling to the conservative movement than Trump? People already kind of made up their minds about Trump in many respects, whether you were disgusted by his flirtation with Russia, affected whether you were a never Trump or you were a Trump loyalist. But here's someone who infiltrated a different element of the conservative movement. And does that make people pause and say, how much are we all being tainted by this development?
Well, I think the stories are obviously related. In the case, let's go back to what you're talking about with Reagan and Gene Kirkpatrick and William F. Buckley, who were all strong opponents of the moral equivalency argument. The argument that, everyone does bad things. Trump has been an advocate of this moral equivalency. And conservatism, going back to Reagan, was very clear that we are the good guys, they're the bad guys. And I think we've talked about Bill Buckley's saying before about comparing the CIA to the KGB is like comparing the guy who pushes an old lady out of the way of a hurtling bus to someone who pushes an old lady in front of a hurtling bus, because you could go say, well, in both cases they're pushing old ladies around, right? So I think in the case of the Trump part, we're breaking from that conservatism that believes in American exceptionalism and believes that there is an evil empire and that there is a shining city on a hill. Now, in the case of this Russian spy, honey trap, I think there's also a similar parallel, right? Just as it used to be the left who were making the moral equivalency argument, it used to be some people on the left who were these useful idiots and dupes. Today, those people seem to be on the right. So that's a huge turn, right? It used to be, now I know that the Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore, but one of their agents is the president of Russia now. And it used to be that people on the left were the ones who were vulnerable and susceptible to being turned or co-opted or whatever. Now it seems to be the target is people on the right. And I think if you look at what appears to have happened, they seem to have been vulnerable to this sort of seduction.
So I want to quibble with some of your premises there, but let me hold off on that for a sec.
I'm going to write about this, so I'd love to get your quibbling now before I make a fool of myself.
So to what extent in Beltway conservative circles are people saying, wow, this Butina thing is really embarrassing, but I feel bad for Paul Erickson, who apparently was the person that she was romantically involved with, at least one of the people she was romantically involved with. I know him, he was a good guy, this is terrible that he got duped by this, but it's this one incident. It doesn't say all that much about the movement in general. Let's get past this. Well, or are some people saying, what does this mean that Russia wants to be associated with us and not the left? There's something about us as a movement that we need to be introspective about and analyze and fix, to not be in league with Putin.
I think the people I talk to, this is now a holy cow, what the hell is going on? And it's scary. It's like the Americans, and it's also There's the salacious sexual aspect to the story. This 29-year-old, redhead, gun-toting mama grizzly from Siberia, allegedly, who knows? So I think that I don't think we've gotten around to a lot of introspection yet. I think a lot of it's like, wow, I can't. This on top of what happened in Helsinki, it's crazy. I can tell you, I'm thinking about it, and I think that there are a few things at play here. One, I think that I think that part of it is you've got some of these conservatives and conservative leaders are out of touch and crazy, and they're desperate for attention. And in a minute I'm going to talk about this, how this ties into the Sacha Baron Cohen story, because I think they're actually surprisingly similar. I think that that's part of it. I think also there's a sense that if conservatives can find a foreigner, again, Sacha Baron Cohen posing as an Israeli, this being a Russian lady, if we can find a foreigner who will who will confirm our political philosophy, that is like an added bonus. And then I think the last factor is how easy it would be for almost anybody to be infiltrated. If someone really, you look at the stuff like James O'Keefe, people were doing with the sting operations. If you really put in the time and effort into a sting, then I think a lot of us would probably be more vulnerable. But the scary thing is that you can show up out of nowhere, start going, probably meet people on Twitter, start going to conservative events, meet one or two people. By the way, the other connection between the Sacha Baron Cohen thing is it was gun people in both instances, right? Larry Pratt from Gun Owners of America appears to be the one who made the introductions for Sacha Baron Cohen to meet, Joe Walsh and the
members of Congress.
And it was, the NRA with David Keene and Paul Erickson, right?
Right.
Who I think is a board member or something or associated with them, that made it this entree. I think this young lady met Scott Walker and got to ask Trump a question at a conference, a political conference. So interesting story.
I do want to talk more about Sacha Baron Cohen a little bit, but I want to get back to your moral equivalency premise.
Okay. Yeah, please.
Because I think you give conservatives a little too much credit there. We can point to Reagan's famous Evil Empire speech, which I think you tweeted the other day, where he directly makes the moral equivalency argument to the left, saying don't talk about America and Russia with this moral equivalence when one side's clearly on the side of evil. I'm butchering the quote, but but he had made that case, as many conservatives did at the time. But let's face it, plenty of conservatives, Reagan included, were perfectly happy to sidle up to other dictators who committed human rights abuses because their interests allied with America, particularly in the debate over capitalism versus communism.
Right.
Compromises were made, to achieve, that end, to win the Cold War.
Yeah. No, actually, this is a good point, because one of the people I wrote about this, and one of the people I mentioned was Jeane Kirkpatrick, who was sort of the Nikki Haley of for Reagan. She had been a former Scoop Jackson Democrat, but she was his UN ambassador. And she gave this speech at the 1984 convention criticizing the San Francisco Democrats and their blame America first mentality. And I referenced the blame America first thing because it seemed to me that what Trump was doing is part of basically the blame America first phenomenon. Now, it's also worth pointing out, though, that Jeane Kirkpatrick, the reason that she caught Reagan's eye to begin with, I think, is this famous essay she wrote called Dictators and Double Standards. And she basically made that argument that what you just described, but see, I think that in the case of Reagan and Kirkpatrick, I think it actually proves my point that the Soviet Union was such an evil empire, and they were this existential threat, and that they were so bad that we then had to maybe do some other things, the ends justify the means, in order to contain and ultimately defeat this evil empire.
Well, this is why many conservatives don't see a contradiction in becoming friendly with Russia right now. They are no longer communist.
Yeah.
They don't have an economic model that is antithetical to America's economic model. Therefore, what are we fighting about?
Right. And they may see, and some of these conservatives may see ISIS as the evil empire.
Right.
And so Putin's like the Contras, or Saddam or something, right?
So
the Mujahideen. I don't even know what the analogy would be. Mm-hmm. But that's part of it. I think it's tortured to make for these conservatives to make that argument, because I think as Romney said, that Russia is, if not at least a major geopolitical threat to America.
Well, and anyone today, you're not in this camp, Matt, but anyone today who loves to hold up Mitt Romney and say Mitt Romney was right, Obama was wrong, and you're still flocking for Trump, I don't want to hear two words out of you. Lindsey Graham, had a statement before the Putin meeting saying Trump won't make the same mistakes Obama made. He's not going to show weakness to Putin. And then, of course, the meeting happens. Graham has this sort of, sad statement. That was a missed opportunity. Then, of course, Trump does his usual cleanup. Then Graham's like, whoo, problem solved. Everything's okay again. Obama's still the weak one here. And I feel like we're missing the complexity and the consistency of Russia's approach to America. And what I mean by that is the Republican narrative for a long time was, the Russians are communists, American liberals are closet communists or closet socialists. They have overlapping agendas. That's why they're easy marks for the Soviets, or they're outright comrades. And therefore they should be, and that's why we mock them as such. And so the Cold War ends. They're not communist anymore. Obama comes in on the heels of Soviet incursion in Georgia, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, that's right, Georgia. That's when he picks Joe Biden right after that.
And this is after George W. Bush, after saying, "I saw Putin Seoul, and it's warm and lovely." But then the Georgia incursion happens. Bush doesn't really know what to do with that. And Obama comes in with the reset, and this is on the premise that these people are not the same kind of mortal enemy that they were during the Cold War. We're not having this titanic struggles of economic dominance. We need their cooperation in a whole host of areas. We got to find a way to make this relationship work.
I think that ended with, in my opinion, that hope ended with Boris Yeltsin.
Well, in retrospect, sure. Although Yeltsin's the guy who gave us Putin. So, but remember, during Obama's first term, Putin technically wasn't the president. It was Medvedev.
Right.
And for me, folks who've heard me on the show forever, I'm probably repeating myself, but I think it's important here. We had a better relationship with Medvedev, which culminated in getting their acquiescence to the UN resolution on Libya, the kind of thing where Russia would normally veto reflexively. Don't let Americans lead a military operation. It's something that's sort of in our backyard, broadly speaking. Obama as president, Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State, convinced Russia, look, this is not a zero-sum game. This is not going to impact you negatively. We're going to do this multilaterally. We're not out to constrain you anyway. And so Medvedev acquiesces. Putin reportedly is livid And so everyone looked at Medvedev just as Putin's stooge. Here's a case where they were not on the same page. And so soon after that, that's when Putin says, "Hey, I'm coming back. You know, I'm not going to have a consecutive third presidential term, but I took off my 4 or 6 years, whatever it was, and now I'm coming back." It was around then, 2012, in the re-election where Romney says Russia's our number one foe. Obama is still in the position of, we've been working with these guys. They're not the sweetest people on the planet, but we're trying to regain a working relationship because we need their help on counterterrorism measures. We need their help on Iran. There's no point in getting into a shooting war with them or treating them like they're our worst enemy because there's something we got to do together. We've made inroads. So, and with the information Romney had at the time, to just simply say they're our number one enemy, well, what was the end point of that? They should not have been working together on Libya? They should not be working together on Iran? That doesn't make any sense, in my opinion.
They went into Georgia, then they went into Crimea.
Well, Crimea was after. Crimea was second term.
But not long after. Long after.
If your opinion was, look, the Georgia thing is so horrible that you should not do any business with them whatsoever from that point.
And then Obama, very foolishly, remember the whole thing about how we're going to let Russia get rid of the chemical weapons in Syria?
Well, again, at that state, with the information you had at the time, you're trying to get chemical weapons out of Syria, and you're trying to do it in a way that you're not having another Iraq where we're occupying directly. So if your argument is Obama was foolish to believe Russia would be a help there, you then have to say, what would you have done instead? If your instead was, I would have gone in militarily and occupied Syria, it's an argument, but you should say that.
Well, I think when he drew the red line and then doesn't, I think that Obama, and I didn't come here to talk about Obama.
I just want to let me finish because I don't want to get down the Syria rabbit hole again.
I think Obama projected weakness, and I think by virtue of Obama's weakness, that gave Putin, encouraged him to be provocative.
I don't agree with that argument. I understand the argument. It's not an illegitimate argument.
But I still think what Trump did is probably worse.
But the point I'm trying to make about Obama is that Russia has been an extremely difficult actor for a very, very long time. They were a difficult actor. I mean, so you go back to FDR and Yalta, for example, which is a conservative touchstone for many. How FDR sold us out at Yalta. Here we are. We're partnering with Stalin to stop Hitler, which few people think was a bad idea in retrospect. That worked. We stopped Hitler.
Pat Buchanan.
But beyond the Buchananites, most people think that was a hard-nosed deal that you had to do. What do you do in the aftermath of that? We wanted the Soviets to not take over Poland, but we lacked a lot of leverage to stop that without getting into a direct shooting war with them right on the heels of World War II. So if your argument is we should have been tougher with Stalin, what is tougher? Tougher is shooting. So you have to make that case. If you want to make that case, fine, but at least understand that was a really complicated situation where our leverage was not fantastic. And that has been our situation with Russia and the Soviet Union forever. They're a tough entity. So Obama's imperfections, weaknesses, mistakes, however you want to call it, is in that context. And just saying, I would have called Russia our number one foe, therefore I would have been stronger and solved all their problems, is, in my opinion, extremely pat. Trump, so Lindsey Graham was lightly critical of Trump for a missed opportunity. Hugh Hewitt, who's also been, a anti-communist guy for a long time, but defended Trump, he wasn't happy with this either, and his response on Twitter was, I thought Trump was going to be stronger with Putin. And he wasn't, which you might say, why would you possibly think that based on anything that he said? But it's all in this frame of who would have been stronger and weaker.
Right.
Whereas I look at it as Obama was someone who looked at Russia as a necessary actor on the world stage to deal with, but extremely complicated and required a lot of tough judgment calls. Trump is at a whole other level. I like Putin and agree with him philosophically in all sorts of things about foreign policy. That's just a very different. I mean, so if you want to critique Obama, critique him, but I wouldn't critique him in this caricature that the right has done for such a long time. And I think that might be easier to do now because, one, Obama's not on the world stage as president, and you see what real obsequience to Russia really is when you look at Trump and Putin.
No, I think that Putin looked at Obama and saw weakness, and that invited provocation. I really do. I think it's kind of unfortunate that being a nice, normal guy makes you look, to people like Putin, it makes you look like a, I'll say wimp. But I think it does, and I do think that that generally speaking, Trump's authoritarian swagger probably doesn't. It's a totally different thing. But in the case of Russia, it's a different type of obsequiousness.
Well, but that thinking made people say Trump has swagger. Trump looks strong.
Russia.
Therefore, since he is strong and Obama is weak, he will do better with Putin. Right. Obviously, that was foolish because you have to read what they actually say in their words and what their beliefs and philosophies are. You would know he was going to be Putin's wingman, not his adversary. I mean, for all of Obama's flaws when it comes to Putin, they did do an Iran deal. I know you don't like the Iran deal, but from the perspective of somebody who thinks the Iran deal is a good thing, it required Russian help to get there. So Obama had to compartmentalize and criticize Putin with Crimea, but work with him on Iran, and they tried to work with them on Syria because they thought the alternative was worse. If you want to say those are bad judgment calls, fine, but I don't think those are not judgment calls out of weakness. They're judgment calls out of the complexity of the world.
Instead of talking about that, I want to talk about the kindergarteners program. What's it called?
This is from the Sacha Baron Cohen show. What is America?
Kindergartens.
So before we go there, Matt.
Okay.
I do have to share my personal Sacha Baron Cohen story.
Yes.
Because
about dupes.
Matt Lewis, was duped by Sacha Baron Cohen.
It could happen to anybody.
That's right. So I'm very sympathetic to people who get snookered by him because I know how this goes down. There's no footage of this. I'm not on camera. But I was in the PR department for a nonprofit in I think this was 2002 or 3. I think when did the Ali G show come out? I think Ali G came out in 2003, but it relates to Ali G. So this is before the show had aired, and I get a request from a British production company called United World Productions.
Sounds legit.
Right. I mean, yeah, it's not legit. In retrospect, it's an obvious fake name. United World Productions. Saying we're producing a British news show aimed at teenagers. And I think the subject matter was immigration, if I remember correctly. And they're looking for a panelist for a panel discussion that was going to take place in D.C. I was in New York, but we had a D.C. office. I go to the United World Productions website. It looks legit. It's British television, so at some level, would I really care? It's not going to be aired here.
No one's going to see it anyway. Right, if it goes bad, nobody you know.
Right. So I contact one of the, this is a legal nonprofit, I contact one of our attorneys, ask her if she can do it. She says yes. So I'm not physically there at the taping session. After it's done, I say, how'd it go? And she was like, it was really weird, and the host was dressed strange, and he asked these really uncomfortable questions, and it was all very disjointed, and all of us in the panel just didn't know what was going on. And I hear this, and I'm kind of like, well, it's British show aimed at teenagers trying to be edgy or crazy or whatever. What are you going to do? It's not going to be shown here. I'm going to go move on with my day. And then, a few months later, there's a New York Times story previewing the Ali G show the people on the panel see the article, they pass around saying, "Oh, this is what we got sucked into." How
worried are you at this point? Like, how worried are you?
I was super pissed. This is my fault. I green-lighted this project, and then I try to see, is there any way we can get out of this legally? I find out there was a release that was signed. So this is what I didn't know. I can't remember when I found out this information, but they signed a release on the spot. They were paid $50, which I think if I was on site, I would have had a red flag there because that's unusual. You don't get paid for news.
But you think that the getting paid thing locked them in is like legal?
I think it was an extra level of legal protection. Not only did you sign this, we paid you for it. You knew what the transaction was here. You have zero recourse.
Some people
to fight
pay.
this.
Like, I think Al Jazeera used to pay people if they came on like $50, and I know like if you do Bill Maher, they have to pay you. There's some like union thing or something.
Maybe there's a union thing there.
I'm not saying it never happens.
Right, but when you go on TV, unless you have a contributor contract, and you're just going on to talk about a single issue, you're not usually paid for that.
No.
And the contract itself was like, you give us the rights to everything, no matter in what way or capacity we use it. You have no standing, whatever, to challenge anything that we do. So we were out of luck too.
But I'm sure like everything you sign for legit and illegit people is that ironclad, right? Like,
I don't have it in front of me. There was certain language in here that did not feel very legally. It felt like if you read it closely, you would see how ridiculous the situation was.
All right. So I got two things to say. One,
just to close out.
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
They never ran the footage. I think they got so many other bigger fish that whatever happened on that show was not nearly as funny enough to warrant putting on the air. So I got off. I got
Newt Gingrich and Pat Buchanan.
Right. So, but I totally see how people get suckered into this because if you present it in a way that one not going to be seen here, but it's for this cool, hip, edgy thing, it gives you a reason to believe why it's weird.
Yeah.
And it's saying you have someone foreign who doesn't know the language very well. There's a part in Who is America where he's talking to Larry Pratt, the Gun Owners of America guy, and talks about the left's anti-tragedy agenda. Where if you stop and think, it's an obvious tell. But it caught up in the moment, knowing the guy's a foreigner, you might just chalk it up to, he just doesn't know the English language very well.
Right. It's funny. Did you see someone caught him, a gun owner, like a gun store owner in California, like he came in there.
Got it. Said, "Aren't you Borat?"
Yeah,
right.
That's really good. To like, it's one thing to be like this smells fishy. It's another thing to say like, "Aren't you Borat?"
I suspect. I wonder what's that's intentional. That they're trying to get the dumbest people. So they want it when it's shown on air for you to look at it and say like, how could you not see through this? It's so obviously a prank. So there has to be a little bit of obviousness to it. So the people who do get caught seem exceptionally stupid.
Well, okay. So I wanted to talk a few things to talk about. One is I wanted to talk about that. Now, look, I am willing to believe that you or I, well, you've already been duped. I'm willing to believe that any of us could be, suckered into something like this. And I'm also willing to believe that if I did an interview with somebody for an hour, they could take things I said out of context, and they could make me look stupid or silly, right? What I don't understand is we have a video of Joe Walsh talking about you can turn first graders into first grenaders. The kindergartens program, which arms second graders, for some cases pre-K kids. What the hell was he doing? How does that happen? Did he think that it was a joke? He was obviously reading a teleprompter. Quite good. He's a hell of a communicator. I'll give him that. I love the first graders into first grenaders. Good gestures. I like the gesticulation. But how does that happen? I get the thing where they take you out of context. But he really said those words, and it's really bizarre. How does that happen?
Well, I mean, you might be able to answer better than me. It seems like there is such a desire on the right to troll, to provoke, to own the libs, to say things that are supposed to make your heads explode. That you now have someone telling you there's an Israeli program that does this and it works. Boy, wouldn't it make the liberals pissed off to know that.
There's a video of, is it Larry Pratt holding like a pink bunny?
That was the other guy. That was Philip Von Cleve, who was someone I wasn't familiar with before.
Okay.
So it's interesting progression. So he gets Philip Von Cleve, who's like the fringiest of all the characters on air, gets him to do the most ridiculous things with stuffed animals and guns. Then takes that video apparently to show Larry Pratt, who's Gunners of America's farther right than the NRA.
There's only no compromise gun lobby.
Right.
That's how they build themselves.
Right. So gets him hooked on it based on the Philip Von Cleve video, then uses Larry Pratt's legitimacy to get into the halls of Congress.
Right. And so that's and I think that our Russian honeypot probably did a similar maneuver. In both cases, they're foreign, right? One's Russian, one's Israeli. In both cases, they are doing that maneuver where they work their way up, get one person to give a reference, to talk to someone else, to give a reference.
So it's
very interesting.
So it's one thing to come to the conclusion, which I think people on the left have more and more since the James O'Keefe stings. We need to have our antenna up.
Yeah.
We need to vet people who come through our doors or call us on the phone. There are plenty of pranksters out to get us and humiliate us. We need to be on guard. To circle back to Butina, that's more than just being pranked. That's someone who has a sinister foreign policy agenda that believes you want to agree with us on that agenda. We think there's overlap in our agendas. And so we want to make your belief in, gun rights libertarianism dovetail with a international order where human rights is not on the menu, where international cooperation is not on the menu, where people can act solely out of crude raw national interest, and that's it. And there is this sort of anti-globalist sentiment that's been on the right, going back to pre-Cold War, going back to the turn of the century. That's where I think people on the right should be saying, wait a second here, maybe my beliefs about the UN are feeding a much more sinister agenda that I don't want to be a part of.
Yeah, I think the Butina thing is not only more serious, but it's obviously harder to detect because it's a long game. It's a long con. I mean, Borat, it's sort of like, you don't know Borat. They've got this scam. It either works or it doesn't. With Butina and Borat, Boris and Natasha, maybe there's something there. With is it Butina?
Yeah, I think so.
With Butina, I mean, think of it like, let's say that this girl starts following you on Twitter and retweets some of your stuff, and then you meet her at CPAC. And maybe David Keene or somebody credible introduces you to her, and then you see her at the Western CPAC or at some other conference, and a couple of years ago, I mean, she's been here doing this for years now. Eventually, and she's a fairly attractive young woman. The obvious point there is how seductive that could be, especially for certain vulnerable, maybe lonely men. Then you've got the aspect that she is confirming your pre-existing beliefs about politics and adding a sort of credibility to it ironically as a foreigner. I don't know. I think it's pretty. I don't want to be too hard on the people who were conned, because they're but for the grace of God. Tweet I.
I don't have anything else to say about the Russia subject. Are you anything else you need to add to this untoward turn of events this week?
All I can say is I predict that there's going to be more sex stuff to come out with her. I predict that it's going to be multiple instances.
Is this informed speculation?
I okay, Bill, I did it. It's not that informative.
I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but like
I've heard
people are talking in DC that there are others.
That's what I've heard.
Okay,
we'll see. But my gut is also that I would tend to believe that that's probably the case.
A tantalizing end to this week's DMZ. Tune in next week.
So, check out our podcast. I interviewed that guy, Michael A. Cohen. Michael A. Cohen?
Yes. So not Michael Cohen, not Trump's Michael Cohen.
He wrote the book American Maelstrom about the 1968 year and elections. So check out the podcast. What do you got going?
So I think I mentioned last week I interviewed Anisha Roy Chowdhury, who wrote The Marginalized Majority, A Defense of Identity Politics. So that podcast is at New Books in Politics podcast at the New Books Network. I have a good guest coming up that I'm interviewing next week, so I'm not sure if it'll be up next week or the week after, but I don't want to reveal that just yet. But exciting guest. I do have at Real Clear Politics this week my dark prediction of what will happen in a post-Roe world of an America divided between the life states and the reproductive freedom states. Will we have an underground railroad, or we have a type of fugitive slave act churning through Congress to stop?
Wait, you're saying there's going to be an underground railroad where unborn babies are somehow rescued to safe states?
It's not quite what I'm saying.
Shepherded. I don't know how that could happen physically.
I mean, there are already abortion funds that help women who want abortions in areas where they're hard to access, to help pay for the abortions, to pay for their transportation. This would happen on a much larger scale, I think, if you had 20 plus states in a large and continuous area of the Deep South and the Midwest. Operations would expand to help those folks get to the reproductive freedom states of the East and the reproductive freedom states of the West.
You can be the Harriet Tubman of abortion.
Right. And I would imagine this would cause some of the life states to say, you're circumventing our laws. We need legislation that's going to criminalize paying for an abortion across state lines. I don't know if that legislation would pass Congress or not, but I think that's the kind of future we're headed towards if Brett Kavanaugh is confirmed and joins with Roberts to overturn Roe. Now, Ross Douthat, argues the other scenario, which I'm not saying is wrong, which is if Kavanaugh and Roberts decide to uphold Roe and only slightly weaken Roe, it's going to be yet another betrayal of the social conservatives, right, and that could shatter the Republican coalition. I think his column was sort of a warning shot to them, saying, hey guys, don't think you can get away with going narrow here and going stare decisis on us. You're going to destroy those who brought you to the dance if you do that. So they're in kind of a lose-lose position to the extent that those two want to insulate the court from causing political upheaval. The expectations are such, because Trump promised overturning Roe v. Wade with his judges, that there's going to be political upheaval whichever way they go. Douthat, I think, only wants to emphasize one side of the coin, whereas I think the potential for severe backlash on whatever they do is pretty high.
I think, that's probably right. I also interviewed my podcast Sarah Longwell. Do you know her?
I don't.
So she is part of this Republicans for Rule of Law, which is like the Bill Kristol group, I think.
Yeah.
She's also head of the Log Cabin Republicans. And her story is really interesting. We had like a really cool discussion, but she came out of the closet while she came out as gay while working for while flacking for Rick Santorum on a book tour.
Wow.
So it's a really interesting story, and part of her message now is don't leave the Republican Party. Like, she basically said, like, she was always a Republican, believed in the Republican cause. She didn't leave the party even when they were pushing, against gay marriage as a prime, policy. And so now her message is, like, just because she doesn't like Trump, obviously, but she's saying, like, don't leave the Republican Party. But her story is pretty amazing. She actually worked for Christine O'Donnell for a little bit at this group called ISI. and that's where she ended up working for Rick Santorum and going on these book tours. This is when people were glitter bombing people in Santorum, and interesting conversation. And that's Matt Lewis in the News at iTunes.
Very exciting. Check it out.
All right.
And we'll talk next week.
You got it. See y'all.